Hello again. This is Reverend Dave Thompson. This is our second attempt today. Our internet was completely shut down for some reason, so we're back. And I wanted to just start again because I wanted to make sure everybody got to hear what I had to say, because there were a couple of items that are pretty important in this list of forgiving individuals. So I'm a civil human minister, and what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And in that effort, the way I'm doing this is looking at my heritage and my spiritual background at the scriptures to see if I can find items and values that I think can be applied to all people across the board, regardless of our different faiths and politics and lifestyles. Today, we're talking the fourth part of our series about forgiveness and talking about today how to forgive. It's a very important process and a very difficult process in many ways. I put a lot of the notes that I'm using for this show in the show notes so that those of you who want to work in the process of forgiveness, maybe yourself or helping somebody else through, those steps will be available for you in those notes. Let's go ahead and read the passage that we have been reading. I just want to read the first two verses to remind us of the values that are being taught here that are human. So this is Matthew chapter 18, verse 21 and 22. Then Peter came to him and said, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. So that's a lot. And the whole value here is that it's a lifestyle of forgiveness. It's a process of learning how to forgive other people. Because there's an important rule here. Not just about forgiving other people and helping them come to reconciliation, but healing ourselves. Forgiveness is often about healing our own wounds. And that's what I want to talk about today, is healing those wounds that have been made as a result of these kinds of injuries and traumas that we may experience by somebody. Oftentimes people we love or that are our friends, which are the ones who cut deepest, right? I want to use an example from my experience in my ministry. Over the last 20 years, I've spent a lot of time working with ministers one-on-one. I became a bit of a minister to ministers. And in that process, I've had to talk with ministers about some of the more complicated aspects of ministry in their congregations. Individuals who are dealing with social issues that conflict strongly with a lot of the church's national stances, even politically. And so I want to use one example in particular because it is a bit touchy and it is a bit controversial, especially for those who come from perhaps more conservative faiths. I certainly came from that background myself, so I understand the culture. This individual, we're gonna call him John, and I want to use his story because it's real and because it's something I experienced, and it's a real testimony to what forgiveness can do for a person. So John was an individual who, as a young man, was taken advantage by an adult friend of the family. And when the parents found out, they talked to John about where he was at with his self-identity, and John expressed that he wanted to consider himself gay and have a relationship with somebody else in the church. Moving forward, the parents did not agree with that. Their particular religious belief didn't provide room for that kind of arrangement, and at the behest of the minister and the parents made a decision to kick their son out. John was a young man, and the only place that he could turn to for shelter was this, in fact, offender who had victimized him before. John had to continue working through some very difficult times as a young man to find and survive. That kind of trauma, that kind of emotional challenge, especially at such a young age, is something that is very difficult to overcome. And I know many of us have our very specific beliefs on the matter of John's sexuality, perhaps in our faith. And that's not the conversation here today. What I do want to point out is how amazed I was when I was given and introduced to John. He explained to me that over the past 10 years, he was now at the end in a place of friendship and love with his parents. I was blown away. That kind of forgiveness is so hard and so rare. There's so much to overcome. I was shocked that he, in fact, made that reconciliation, and largely outside of his spiritual conclusions, he decided that as a person, it was important for him to move past this. And that's what I want to talk about today. Forgiveness is not just giving reconciliation to the people who've offended us. That's part of it. Reconciliation also, and maybe more importantly, is about providing care for our wounds. When we endure these traumas, when we have something that is somebody who offends us, and especially those who are our loved ones and friends and wound us deeply, that is a wound, and it needs to be cared for. Oftentimes we throw some first aid on it and we do some immediate trauma care, but there's some hurt that needs to be resolved. And the process of forgiveness, although it sounds strange because it seems like we're dismissing things, is that forgiveness means to send away or to let it go. What it really means is letting go of trauma and allowing ourselves to heal from that experience. And I want to talk about some of the steps that John shared with me that he used to get to that place, and stories that I've heard from other people, experiences, methods that other people have shared with me, ministers, and just individuals that I respect, as well as psychologists. And again, I put those notes in the show notes because those of you who want to proceed in this aspect, you'll have those notes to look to. So how do we forgive? How do we get from a place of being incredibly wounded and hurt to a place of love and reconciliation? It begins by asking how. How do we forgive? It begins by saying, how do I deal with this emotion and this hurt? By taking that first step, we allow ourselves to recognize that there is a wound. And that's really the second part of it. The second step is understanding that we have a deep wound that needs to be healed. We have got to move past something that, if we do not address it, will continue to fester and will continue to just be there reminding us of that pain, of that stress. And by forgiving it, we're going to be able to heal the wound and to leave it in the past and to remember it, yes, but to be able to walk forward in our lives without that baggage and that stress. So what's the first action? I have often found it, and John shared this with me in particular, prayer was his first step. John at the time was not a spiritual person, meaning he, in his experiences, he harbored a great resentment to religion. But he said, I still needed to pray. And I really appreciated that. I know in myself, in my life, there are those moments when I doubt the aspect of God, and I'm not sure if I should pray. And what good does it do if, for instance, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in God? How do I pray? Well, prayer is more than just speaking to God. It can be just placing something out there for the universe or for us to recognize. The whole point of prayer is being able to allow our minds to pay attention to a very specific issue and to think about it and to work the problem, to understand how we can resolve it. That's what prayer really provides us with. I want to talk about empathy, because unless we get to a place of empathy, it's very difficult for us to let go. And empathy comes in many different ways, but the first one is really understanding the nature of people. It's hard for us to understand why somebody would hurt us so bad, would wound us so deeply. But the reality is oftentimes those individuals thought that they were doing the right thing. John's parents, case in point, they thought that they were doing the right thing. They literally believed that their actions of kicking their son out of their house to fend for himself was a just and a good action. Oftentimes it's important for us to recognize that the individuals who hurt us may not have intended that. And not only that, but if we were given their circumstance, their biology, their experiences, we might likely do the same thing. And it may be hard for us to recognize that, but it's the truth. Empathizing makes sure that we understand that we get where the offender was coming from. And we may not actually get to that place. We may, of course, say, I would never do that. In a million years, I couldn't do it. Well, we couldn't. Those of us who have been offended, we couldn't, because our experience in biology doesn't allow that possibility. But having the ability to think about these things and to think from a different perspective does allow us the opportunity to step into somebody's shoes and to remove a lot of the hate and anger that comes with that. The next thing I want to talk about, and there's just a couple more points. Talking with somebody that we respect and consider as wise. That is one of the more important steps as well. Because when we are dealing with these hurts and these emotions and these wounds, we are clouded by the emotion that is overwhelming us, the stress, the hurt and injury that we can only see. Sometimes talking to somebody outside of our sphere of influence or outside of the immediate aspect of what's going on, a counselor, a spiritual leader of some sort, a friend, a family member, will allow us to have an independent thought, somebody outside who has a clear perspective that isn't clouded by emotions, although they will be emotional as a result of you telling the story. But getting the opportunity to hear things and to run through things by somebody who is outside of the situation gives us a chance to make sure that we are doing what we need to understand the process and to make the growth that we need to be able to make. There are two last things that I want to point out. The first one is this: forgiveness is a process of healing, and a process of healing ourselves from that injury. When we identify the wound, when we recognize and we step forward and say, I need to forgive this person so that I can move forward and not have to suffer through the stress of the memory and the trauma. When we clean the wound, bring it out in the open, take the first aid that we threw on there to deal with the issue and start to clean the wound, which we have to do. Because the brain, the body cannot resolve themselves until we deal with it. The brain holds it. The way that we are hardwired as human beings, in our mind, when we go through traumatic events, the brain puts it in a special place because it's a matter of survival and it's a matter of great trauma. It treats it as an imperative, important memory. And so we have to allow our brains to take that memory, to deconstruct it and associate it with better memories, compassion, forgiveness, love. Those types of things reassociate this memory and take it out of our brain's critical stress, fight or flight response. That takes time. It takes a lot of time. John took 10 years to get to that place, and he had only reconciled with his parents in the last 2 years. And even then, working with them was difficult because they had a lot of regret as well when it came down to it. The deeper the wound, the longer it's going to take. If you've been hurt by somebody, know that the emotion doesn't just disappear when you decide to forgive them. It's a process of continuing to forgive, and that's the last thing that I want to talk about. Keep forgiving. Whether it's the person in the situation that you're dealing with right now, whether it's people in the future who are going to hurt you, continue to forgive, because it is partially about the people that we are having mercy on and compassion upon, but it's also about us being able to move forward with a place of recognizing that we are the ones who heal as a result of the process and who gain so much as a result of it. Thank you so much for your participation in this series in particular. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about how to be forgiven. And I'm going to be talking about a parent who, on the other side of the coin, the parent who had kicked their daughter out and who was trying to figure out how to ask for forgiveness. So I want to talk about some of those steps tomorrow. And until then, live at noon, I want you to know I love you. And I hope that you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.